But yeah, I'm going to talk to you guys about the FTC safeguards and really the topic of the FTC safeguards as far as what they are, why they're important, why you should care. That stuff I feel like is kind of a dead horse that's been beaten over and over. So what I'm going to really focus on in my presentation is the fact that, okay, we know what the FTC safeguards are for the most part. If you don't, feel free to approach me afterwards and we can have a discussion. But at this point, a lot of people are aware. But what I'm going to talk a bit more about is the fact that, okay, these requirements are in place. It's law. Bob reiterated the fact that, this is a law that you should abide by. That should be your motivation for doing it. But in doing so, you can benefit from that by having a mature security program that protects your assets. So rather than viewing it as simply a check-the-box exercise, if you actually follow the letter of the law, it can help to make your dealership more secure and essentially reduce risk. Because these days, IT risk is business risk. We used to sort of separate those things out, especially for auto dealers. But today, they're very much intertwined in the digital world. So I'll talk about how these things can be beneficial, and you'll see a lot of the overlap between best practices and what the FTC is saying you must do today. Quick background about me. I am the Director of IT Advisory Services at OCD Tech. So OCD Tech has been the IT audit and security consulting division of O'Connor and Drew for 10 years now, focusing specifically on IT compliance and security best practices, helping organizations to become more secure as consultants. A number of the industries and verticals we work within are, of course, auto dealers, as well as higher education, Department of Defense contractors, financial services. So we're very well versed in heavily regulated industries. For me specifically, I come from a background of actually, not to date myself, but starting with dial-up internet support out of high school, followed by IT operations in the casino industry, and then eventually making my way into more of IT security and compliance areas. So have some industry certifications and some background that allow me to work with organizations such as auto dealers to help them be more compliant and overall more secure. So what I'm going to talk about in this presentation is the attackers, who they are, what their methods are, who the victims are, and what the repercussions are. I've also got a blooper reel, which is kind of our collection of some of the worst that we've seen, specifically at auto dealers. And this is not at all a criticism of auto dealers, but more of a representation of you don't know what you don't know. You've hired IT people that very well could be doing their best, or you've hired a third-party firm to manage your IT. They could be representing that you're very secure, that you're unhackable. We've heard that term before. But what we do is go in and provide that assurance by doing what an attacker would do and figuring out how vulnerable are you, what sort of things could be exploited to hack into your systems, and then give you that picture of what can be done to mitigate those risks and make you more secure against an attack. So I'll talk about the compliance aspect, which is more of a symptom of some of those things that we've seen, and then ultimately solutions that can help you to be more secure and compliant. So the main theme here is that security should be first, and that compliance is the byproduct of a good security program rather than compliance being the primary focus, and then you get some security out of being compliant. So, but I will sell you on that concept through my scared straight presentation here. So for starters, the attackers, we have nation states such as Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. These are a lot of the countries that we're seeing attacks come from. And the theme here is that no target is too small. It used to be that, okay, my small to medium-sized business is not going to be the target of an attack that's a nation-state attack from North Korea, state-sponsored. But what we're seeing is countries like North Korea are actually launching smaller scale attacks against small businesses to raise funds for larger scale attacks against US critical infrastructure. So if they can hit a few auto dealers or a few small businesses for a $200,000, $500,000 ransom, they can use that to then fund a larger scale attack against US energy and more critical infrastructure that can impact the US economy. So a demonstration of that is the fact that in February of this year, the government Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a super redundant name, but they issued a Shields Up advisory to all companies in the United States. So this advisory was not just to critical infrastructure. It wasn't just to the power companies, the Department of Defense contractors. This was an advisory that said all US businesses should be on the lookout for attacks coming specifically from Russia due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And again, it can be used as a source of just disruption of the US economy, operations, business, and also to generate funds for other types of attacks against other nations. So that's something that was put out in February just to keep a heads up for imminent attacks coming from Russia for all businesses of all sizes in every industry. In addition to nation states, other attackers are organized crime groups. So the equivalent of the mob and mafias of yesteryear, the cyber criminals have become organized. These guys have reporting structures. They have company getaways. They've got annual reviews. I mean, they're very well organized, funded, and structured. An example of that is what they call ransomware as a service. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but if you're not familiar, ransomware is launching an attack against a company, encrypting their files, and essentially holding them at ransom for a code that will unencrypt them and saying, unless you pay me X number of dollars, I will not unlock your files and you won't be able to access all the files on your systems, and it ultimately halts business operations. So that's a ransomware attack. What's changed is the fact that used to take some sophistication and understanding of IT. You used to have to be a hacker or a coder that put together an attack like this. Ransomware as a service is actually a part of the internet called the dark web that's difficult-ish to get to. But if you showed somebody, I could probably show my grandmother how to get on the dark web. You can actually go on, and an unsophisticated individual with very little technology can go and buy a ransomware attack as a service. So you pay the hackers that know how to do this stuff a fee, or basically they take a percentage of the profit to launch attacks against a business. The third type of attackers that we're seeing is insider threats. This is not as common for auto dealers, but there are kind of subcategories of this. So an insider threat is somebody that works for your company that could pose a threat to your organization, whether they be disgruntled, trying to commit some sort of fraud and funnel out money, just angry and want to send out a bunch of customer information, or accidental disclosure is another thing we see, where somebody just emails the wrong recipient and it includes sensitive information about somebody's financing information. So those are the types of attackers. I talked about the ransomware as a service. This is actually an example of a dashboard on the dark web where you can go and you can buy this. And they say that there's no honor among thieves, but they actually have a review system. So for these ransomware as a service attacks, you can go in and say, 5 stars, great product. I launched it against 100 businesses. I hit 50 of them, I made $500,000. This guy only took 10%. What a great product, would recommend it to anyone else. So the first screenshot shows that individual's profile on the dark web where they've been rated and user reviews have been left. And then the bottom screenshot shows a dashboard of if you purchase ransomware as a service, you can actually watch as it's generating money for you. It tells you how successful your attacks are, who you've hit, and as you can see, a very easy to use interface. It's not what we picture hackers, in a black and white prompt, typing in code. It's just very much click on this button, tell us who the victim is, and we'll share the money. Another type of attack that we're seeing too is with breach of information. So in addition to locking your systems and making sure that your business can't operate until you pay, they're actually funneling out data, say customer records, and saying, okay, we're going to post these on the internet so all of your customers' social security numbers are available for purchase unless you pay us. Or sometimes they don't even give you the opportunity of a ransom. They'll just say, hey, look, we stumbled across a huge list of bank account numbers. Let's post it on the dark web for sale and say 500 bank account numbers for sale, $5,000, or highest bidder. So those are the sorts of things that we're seeing. So this is an example of an issue that we see with recycling credentials. So on the dark web, one of the things that you can find either for free or for purchase is a list of email addresses and passwords that come from breaches. So the company that I work for, say OCD Tech, they do a good job of protecting my passwords to make sure that my password doesn't get in the hands of a bad guy. However, if I sign up for a grocery delivery service, say I want Shaw's to deliver groceries to my house, I go to their website, it says click here to set up account. I use my OCD Tech email address. I use the same password that I use for my OCD Tech email because it's easy to remember. Next thing you know, I have no idea how well Shaw's is protecting my password. They get breached by an attacker, that gets posted out on the dark web. An attacker now has not only my password to the Shaw's delivery service, they have my password to my actual email account. So this demonstrates, how easy this information gets out here and how important it is to have things like multi-factor authentication, because if an attacker has my password, but they don't have my cell phone that comes through with the multi-factor code to allow them to log in, they're not going to be able to get in. So that kind of demonstrates that importance there. This example that I have up on the screen is actually for NADA. So this is publicly available through a service that we use and that we offer to our clients that monitors the dark web for breaches. So there are hundreds of NADA email addresses out there and associated passwords, which I'm always happy to provide these to anyone. We can run a free report for you and send it along. Here's another example of CarMax. We had 100+ hits for CarMax, and these are somewhat of a valid email address and possibly a valid password. Again, if somebody's using the same password for their company email or any company internet-facing applications as they do on other service they sign up for, these passwords very well could work today. So that being said, multi-factor authentication is one of the FTC requirements. It is one of the ones that's been extended to the new June 9th deadline. As Bob mentioned, some of these have remained and are due tomorrow. The rest have been extended out till June because a lot of this stuff takes time. The FTC requirements were, it was pretty ambitious to require this of auto dealers in less than a year period. The law went into effect January 10th. Auto dealers were expected to be fully compliant by December 9th, tomorrow. The FTC realized that even the DMSs like Reynolds didn't fully have multi-factor authentication available in their application. So how are you as an auto dealer supposed to be compliant when the products that you're using aren't even compliant? So that's why this got extended. But multi-factor authentication, where available, is a must these days. And if you don't have it, you're kind of already behind, because as I showed you, your credentials very well could be out there, and it makes it ripe for picking for an attacker to be able to get in. Even that being said, multi-factor is great. Training people is also very important, because even with multi-factor authentication, what we're able to do, only when we're given permission to, is hack into systems and actually bypass multi-factor authentication. So what we do is we act as an attacker. We stand up a website or a page that looks just like your company email login. We make it, if it's, abc.com is the company, we'd make it, abc.net, and make the page look just the same. We then send an email to an employee, and when they click on it, they're not going to the company website they think they're going to another website that mimics it, that tells them, put in your username and password here, it's time to change your password. It then prompts them for multi-factor authentication. They get that code on their phone, they plug it into our website, which we're watching in the background. We then have their code, and we can log in with their account. So attackers are even able to bypass that, which again is an example that, if you don't have MFA, you're definitely behind. But in addition to that, know that even that isn't perfect, and people need to be trained to be able to spot a bad email. And it's surprising, we offer security training. We watch, when we first set up simulated phishing campaigns, so we send out the types of emails an attacker would send. We see how many employees are clicking on this and falling for this stuff. People are suckers still for a Tom Brady subject line. Everybody loves the headline. Massachusetts still hasn't gotten over it. So if it's got Tom Brady in it, people are going to click, and then they're going to a website where they're susceptible to an attack. As far as the victims, I already kind of mentioned that no industry is safe and no size business is safe from an attack. This is hard to read, but this is the Verizon data breach incident report, or investigation report rather. This is a very helpful report to review, and I can provide it to anybody that would like, but this basically shows industry trends of what types of attacks are being done, what types of industries it's on, and what size organizations. And the general trend we're seeing, and this comes from industry inputs, is that small to medium-sized businesses are more targeted than larger businesses, because a hacker knows, somebody in Russia trying to hack U.S. businesses realizes that Bank of America is not going to be an easy target. But these smaller organizations are likely to have less security. Another one of the things that we're seeing too is the persistence, and these attackers are really studying U.S. businesses to find out how they operate, the days of operation. They gather information. They'll sit and watch for maybe a month or two to figure out the best impact. Do I do it? Do I launch the attack on a Saturday? What's going to impact business operations the most? They also investigate the company as far as size and finances to figure out how much are they going to pay. If they're going to be out for a week, are they going to pay me $100,000? Are they going to pay me $500,000? They're actually doing this research to really craft an attack, custom to your organization, to make sure that it's got the impact desired and that they'll get the best payout. Further evidence of the auto dealers not being exempt from this, these are all headlines within the past year of auto dealers being hit with ransomware attacks. So the repercussions, obviously the downtime that I mentioned, how long can you afford to be out of business if your computers are all down and you can't sell cars? For one, what is your backup plan? The FTC Safeguards actually has a component that requires you to have an incident response plan, but there's a huge benefit in not only having that plan, but executing and testing that plan, just sitting down in a room with whether it's your internal IT person or an external IT provider, and figuring out, okay, if we get hacked today or we suspect that we're being hacked, what do we do? Who do we call? Do we have a procedure to follow? Those are the good discussions to have to figure out, do we just go buy more computers? Where are our backups? How do we back this stuff up? Is all of our information in the DMS in the cloud? Are we covered there? Do we even know where all of our critical information is? So that's one way that this requirement from the FTC can be super helpful. Again, if you're doing it correctly, you can really get a lot of benefit here and protect yourself. The ransom money, the average for 2022 so far is $4.5 million. Again, the attackers are watching trends and figuring out, okay, how much does a cybersecurity insurance company pay out? You know, what's the maximum based on their policy? If they can get into your systems, they may even be able to figure out what your policy is. So that's the average across all industries and companies of all sizes. So that's a pretty hefty ransom to have to pay. And then, of course, one of the unspoken or unrecognized repercussions is damage to reputation, which is a very difficult one to calculate. I know for me personally, if I saw that an auto dealer that I bought my car from made the headlines because all of their customer information got leaked out there on the internet, I probably wouldn't be as likely to go back and buy a car. So that's one of those that's, you know, really tough. And the mitigations there, if there is a damage to reputation, there's a lot of cost associated there because there's likely going to have to be ads, some marketing, public relations, rebranding, sometimes compensation. You'll see with some of these breaches, if customer information gets out there, the company will offer credit monitoring to the people impacted for up to 2 years and say, okay, oops, your social security number got out there because we didn't handle it properly. So for 2 years, we're going to help you monitor your credit through this free app. The app is free to consumers. It is not free to the company providing it. So, you know, that's another thing to consider, is that what is it going to cost you to provide that type of service if you need to in order to repair your reputation. And then, of course, the fines for the FTC safeguards, which are $50,000 per infraction. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I pretend to be one. I definitely recommend consulting with legal counsel on that. But it seems a bit open to interpretation as far as what constitutes an infraction, whether it's one of the requirements, whether it's a number of records. But either way, you know, it could definitely tally up to a pretty significant impact in those per infraction fines. I'm sure that's something that Bob can provide more information on. The cyber insurance, which I've mentioned, you know, the analogy here, we've had companies that we've talked to about cybersecurity, and they've said, well, we've got cyber insurance, so we'll just kind of rely on that. So the analogy that I always draw is, you know, you're still going to check your brakes and tires before a long road trip. Insurance is great, but we want to prevent getting in an accident to start with, or running out of gas, or whatever it may be. So at the end of the day, the problem with cyber insurance is that, like any other insurance company, their job is not to pay out. It's how they make money. So if your company gets hit with a ransomware attack and it's got a $500,000 ransom, their first job is to figure out how they don't have to pay that, whether it's through helping you to restore things, or by finding ways that you were negligent so that they don't have to cover it. And you know, that's one of the things that we're seeing is these insurance companies that offer cyber insurance are getting more and more strict with their requirements, a lot of which overlap with the FTC safeguards. So in order to even get insured, you have to have multi-factor authentication in place, and a lot of these things that, again, are in the FTC rule. Otherwise, you're going to pay a huge premium, or in some cases, they won't cover you at all. And the problem with having cyber insurance is there's still going to be downtime if you don't have a good process in place, if you don't have an incident response process that says, okay, we've been hit with an attack, let's call the cyber insurance company. Do we have the contact information ready? Do we know if we have to contact the Attorney General? All those sorts of things that can really take time during a critical incident. Those are the things that you need to know. So the blooper reel. And again, not a criticism, but for us as security experts, these are the sorts of things that keep us up at night. So one of the things that we've seen is poor physical controls. And a specific example of that is we did a security assessment for a dealership where we walked in through an open garage bay through the service department. We were able to access the server closet that had their DMS in it because it was unlocked through an open service bay. We then found that when we opened the closet, there was a sticky note that had the domain administrator username and password on it. So we literally went from sidewalk to having the keys to the kingdom in 3 minutes. Another example we've seen is that the guest wireless or a secondary wireless was not segregated from the company network. In one case, it was actually a manufacturer that came in and set up a wireless for diagnostics to their cars. So when you pull the car in, it can hook up to the diagnostic system and run diagnostics. So the manufacturer set it up this way that it had no password because at that time the diagnostics just didn't have the capability to pass a password from the car to the network. So they set it up as just a guest network that was supposed to only access the internet. However, the manufacturer did not set it up that way, and it was directly routable to all the company assets. So we could connect to this manufacturer's network and immediately start attempting to log into the DMS just from sitting out in the parking lot. And we've seen the same thing with guest wireless as well, that you get on, you connect to the guest wireless, and at times we'll start browsing around and we can find sensitive data. We're finding people's, scans of people's licenses by simply just pulling into the parking lot and connecting to guest wireless due to just poor configuration. Another one that we saw recently was an internet-facing voice message system that did voice to text. So this was actually a website that anyone could go to and actually view voice messages of people calling the dealership, customers calling about vehicles that they were purchasing with information about cost and fees and time that they were coming in. And again, without any sort of password or anything, this was just out there on the internet. That's something that we uncovered during an assessment. Default credentials is another one, a big one that we've seen. So when you buy a device, you buy a fancy new firewall to protect your company, it comes out of the box with a certain username and password that you should change immediately. Sometimes that password doesn't get changed, and a lot of these manufacturers just use the same one for every one of their devices. So you can go on the internet and say, what is the default password for a Netgear router? And you can log into any router that hasn't been changed. So again, a misconfiguration that can easily get missed. Another one that was a really unfortunate example is an organization that claimed to only handle data within the DMS, which is one thing that we've heard, but we always look to kind of prove and provide assurance of. So this particular dealership said everything's in the DMS. We walk into the showroom floor, we walk up to a computer that's unattended, a sales computer on the floor. There's no password required to get into it. All you have to do is wiggle the mouse around, and there were military discharge papers, a scanned copy directly on the desktop of this computer. So we just double click and boom, we're looking at someone's military discharge papers. Again, just from walking in from the sidewalk with no identification of who we are or what we're doing. So moving into the solution now, the FTC safeguards rule is a combination of policy, process, and technical requirements, and even staffing requirements. There's a requirement to have a qualified individual. There's some open to interpretation on exactly what a qualified individual is and what that definition is. But at the end of the day, the FTC provides some guidance that essentially says the individual responsible for navigating your company's security and compliance, do you trust them based on the size of your company, the amount of data that you handle? And typically the best way to find that is through some sort of industry credentials. They have certifications, they go to annual training for security groups. So it can be somebody internal to the company or it can be an outside provider. But again, that's kind of one of the personnel requirements for the rule. There's also requirements to have policies. A lot of the requirements which stood with the December 9th deadline of tomorrow were some of the more policy-based ones. A lot of the more technical and difficult ones did get pushed out to June. But again, what the FTC has realized is that this was a tall order for auto dealers, and some of the feedback we've heard is, well, as Bob said, can I wait now a little bit later to get started? But the message here is the FTC said, wow, this is a lot to do in just a year. It really is going to take a year and a half. So if you're starting at the point of 0 right now, there's still a lot of work to be done to get there. And I'll get into some of the sort of the myth busting about the rule and how the compliance requirements can be met in a minute. But overall, what we've been doing, because you can see it's hard to read, but these are the NADA projections on cost. If you haven't seen these already, these have been bounced around for a while. But the NADA put together some projections, tried to push back on the FTC and say, hey, this is going to be way too costly, to the effect of, hundreds of thousands of dollars for even small to medium-sized auto dealers. But for the dealerships that have been a bit more proactive and that have been spending years kind of having their security assessed and doing some of these things already, it was a much smaller undertaking. So really the message here is being proactive. It's certainly not too late, but crushing regulations are going to continue to come down. And what we recommend is to align with a cybersecurity best practice framework. So that's what we're doing with a lot of our clients, and we're seeing those that are adopting best practices. When something like this comes along, they're like, oh yeah, hey, we're already doing the majority of this stuff. So rather than having to spend, that estimated $200,000 over the course of a year to become compliant, it's, oh, we're already doing most of this. We've spread it out over the course of 10 years. So again, just a proactive approach is really a good way to approach this. So our crystal ball here, not to say I told you so, but as I mentioned, for 10 years, we've been working with auto dealers to help them be more secure. We've been on our soapbox, preaching you should have multi-factor authentication. You really should train people. You really need to manage the vulnerabilities on your network. Insurance companies for cyber insurance in the past few years have come in and said, you need to implement multi-factor authentication, train users, manage vulnerabilities. Lo and behold, the FTC this year comes in and says these exact same things that we've been preaching for the past 10 years. So this stuff definitely isn't going anywhere, and only more regulations are apt to come down at the state and federal level. Luckily / unluckily, however you want to view it, we don't have a comprehensive data protection law nationwide like they do in Europe. They have the GDPR. We have more state-based, Massachusetts has specific requirements for protecting residents of the Commonwealth and their information. But these things aren't going anywhere, and it's going to continue to advance. The FTC safeguards is an industry-specific one, but overall, we're going to see more and more regulations as time goes on. So one of the challenges that we've seen is designating the qualified individual, as I mentioned, having somebody that has those requirements. The challenge that we've seen is, and I'll talk about sort of the misconceptions in a minute, but the qualified individual, we've seen some say, okay, well, our CFO is going to be our qualified individual, or Bob in the parts department. He's pretty good with computers. He's going to be our qualified individual. Again, it's do you trust that individual to have the know-how and understanding of your IT operations to be able to make the choices that the FTC safeguards allows you, because there are some nuances there and some decisions that can be made as far as the multi-factor authentication. You don't necessarily need it anywhere. So one of the issues we've seen is that if an auto dealer says, okay, our IT provider, our third-party IT provider is going to be our qualified individual, the IT provider is going to come in and say, okay, multi-factor authentication. We're going to put it on every computer for every application, and it's going to cost you $60,000 to have us do that, because naturally they can upsell you, versus having a third-party objective view or somebody internally that understands where your customer information sits to be able to make the call of, hey, wait a second, it really is only in our DMS, or it really is on this one F&I computer. That's where we need these safeguards put in place. So it's having an individual that's capable of understanding the requirements and making those decisions that can be implemented in a cost-effective way. So as I've hinted towards, compliance doesn't equal security, unfortunately. Compliance is the minimum set of requirements that allows you to legally do business. The FTC does not care if you get hit with a ransomware attack that puts your business down for 2 weeks. That's not their problem. Their concern is protecting consumer information. So there's nothing in the FTC safeguards rule that really protects you from things like downtime and availability of your resources. So that's why it's important to, approach it from the lens of security, and then let compliance sort of be the byproduct of that. So the myth busting, a software solution will not make you compliant. So there are some options out there. Any of the approaches and any of the services, for the most part, that are available today for FTC safeguards compliance, you can be compliant using those. The sort of different buckets that we see is service-based, which is what we provide, and then there are some that are software-based. I equate it to hiring a CPA versus buying TurboTax. And that's what we sort of hear in differences in pricing. It's like, well, this is way cheaper, the software that I can buy, but at the end of the day, is the information going into the software accurate, and do you have the expertise in-house to be able to provide good information to that software? So it's making sure that you have the resources and understanding to be able to use that software to be compliant, and that you're really doing these things. Because at the end of the day, if you experience a breach, the FTC gets alerted, they come in, they don't care that you bought a piece of software and downloaded a template that says, yes, we have multi-factor authentication, yes, we have encryption. They're going to say, show me. And if you can't demonstrate that, it really isn't helpful that you have some policies that say that you're doing these things in compliance with the rule. The other myth that we've heard is the 5,000 customer exemption. There are some exemptions from the rule for organizations that don't hold information for over 5,000 customers, but that is 5,000 customers ever, not per year. I already mentioned the qualified individual and the fact that we can just hit some random unfortunate soul with a magic wand and say they're our qualified individual. You really need to make sure that they have some sort of credentials and that you've vetted that and are really comfortable with who's responsible. And again, all of our customer data is in the DMS, is a mantra that we've heard over and over. But at the end of the day, we conduct walkthroughs with sales and F&I, and there's always oh yeah, but sometimes or occasionally we'll have to get it from email, or sometimes so-and-so gets texted this. That's the sort of stuff to look for and make sure you have an understanding of, to really know that you have the correct safeguards in place in all the right places, or alternatively, that you're training your workforce to understand that, hey, this is sensitive information. We put protections in place in these areas. You can't just go asking a customer to send you this via text, to send you a picture of their license, without having additional controls in place to mitigate that risk. So if I can skip over a few slides here. I think I'm running up against time. So really, ultimately, it's about fostering a culture of IT security through training and understanding, asking the question, what more can we do? The FTC requirements include provisions to continually re-examine and reevaluate risk, periodically conduct risk assessments, periodically conduct vulnerability scans. None of this is set it and forget it. This is ongoing efforts to see that security is improving continually is really what the rule aims to do. So that's pretty much it. I probably ran through Q&A time, but if we're out of time, feel free to just approach me after, and happy to answer any questions.